City Matters.
Hello, and thank you for joining me. I'm Bernie Fershpan, host of Raised by Survivors here on hmTV at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center in Glen Cove, New York. I have a very special guest who I recently met and become friends with. His name is Irv Miljoner. Thank you so much, Irv, for joining me.
My pleasure.
We met a few weeks ago in Oceanside, Long Island, and we immediately resonated with each other about these stories. And you have a lot of connections here with the museum. So let's talk a little bit about that first, that you were the founder of the 2G or second generation group of Long Island that was supported and affiliated by the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center.
Yes, indeed. I was lecturing at a conference on human trafficking about 20 years ago out east at Touro Law School. And in the audience was the education director for the Holocaust Center. And she came and spoke to me afterwards and asked me if I would give a similar presentation at the Holocaust Center. And I said, "Where is that?" And she told me it's in Glen Cove, relatively new at the time. And I had never known there was a Holocaust museum or a Holocaust center on Long Island. I immediately said yes. We met thereafter. She explained some of the proposed programs at the time, coordination with law enforcement. And I had been the director of a federal civil law enforcement agency, hence my connection to human trafficking. And she asked me if I would like to be involved, and I said certainly, and proceeded to ask me what I would like to see by way of programming, which they were still developing. And I didn't have to think long about it. I said, there are thousands, likely, maybe tens of thousands, but certainly thousands of children of Holocaust survivors living right on Long Island, and we should have a group.
Right.
And she said, "Fine, you are the founder, and you can develop the agenda. We can have monthly meetings. We'll support it." And thus was born the second generation group of Long Island.
Do you think that was the first 2G organization or group that was developed maybe on the Northeast, in the Northeast?
No. There had already been, I was aware of a second generation group in New York City.
Oh, I see.
I subsequently heard that there was a loosely formed second generation group that possibly met in the 5 towns, but we wanted it to be formalized, and we started advertising it. The center did, and we held monthly meetings at the JCC in East Hills, and it quickly grew in popularity. There was evidently a need and a desire for people to get together and talk about their experiences. And
they're common experiences.
They're common experiences.
Common experiences because we were both raised by survivors. Were both your parents survivors of the Holocaust?
Both of them were.
Yep. And where did they grow up in Europe?
Both of my parents are from Poland. My father was from a small town, he says not so small, called Pabianice, not far from Warsaw. My mother grew up, my mother was from Pabianice. My father was from Pietrków, a small town near Warsaw. Pabianice, where my mother was from, was near Lodz. Okay. And so she was in the Lodz ghetto, and
So my mom was from a small town called Kutno, which is also near Lodz. But when the Nazis crossed the border, they immediately fled towards the Soviet Union, and that's where they ended up. Because they knew what was happening in Germany. It was very close to the border of Germany, whereas my dad he lived in a town in what is now the Ukraine. So it was all hearsay for them about what was happening in Germany. It was a small, isolated village.
It always amazes me to hear about the escapes.
Right.
More amazing to me is to know that so many people, whether in denial or otherwise, chose not to escape in time.
Right.
When we formed the group, we developed certain rules. We had a mission statement to share the experience and the awareness of having been raised as children of Holocaust survivors, and to explore and discuss those experiences and the bonds we have, the burdens and the responsibilities of being children of Holocaust survivors. And we heard that there were about 30 to 40 people who attended each meeting at the start. And we went around the room. There were always new people. And to hear their stories, which were quite varied, stories like your father and your parents, and other escape stories, kinder transport stories, and of course the labor camps and concentration camp stories. And we quickly noted that we're not assigning a hierarchy. You're more of a legitimate child of Holocaust survivors because your parents were in concentration camps, as opposed to somebody else's parents who escaped. They were also victims of the Holocaust. Obviously, their family lives were shattered. And so we didn't assign a hierarchy to children of Holocaust survivors. They were all children of survivors.
Right now, in my family, we have 4Gs. Wow. We have, our kids and their kids. So we're already talking about 4Gs inheriting this story, this legacy that my parents and my grandparents left behind. Is just incredible. I mean, I think that I was impacted by my survivor parents in terms of what career choices I made, number one, and what career changes I made. I learned to survive like they survived. If I wanted to do something, I wasn't afraid to make a move. It's those that weren't afraid that actually survived. Those that were afraid stayed frozen and they were eliminated, unfortunately. But many ran away and many hid, like my dad was able to hide. He hid in the forest for 3 years. And if he felt it was dangerous here, he moved there. So he wasn't afraid to make moves. And I learned from my dad that you can actually make changes in your lives without fear. And so I had many careers. You also had a lot of career choices. And I think that was influenced by your parents. Can you talk to us about that?
Sure. It kind of developed as such. My parents were very conservative in their thinking, get a good job, become a lawyer or a doctor or an accountant. I had no great interest, although I applied for accounting jobs and I applied for law school, and I don't like the sight of blood, so I never was interested in being a doctor. But I took what many consider one of the most conservative routes. I got a civil service exam, took a civil service exam and got a federal job. There was a federal professional career exam that I took in my senior year in college. Among other studies, I have an education degree and certification, and I had a teacher job lined up right after school, which I lost before I even started. I was bumped by somebody with more tenure, and the federal government called me off this list, and it was the U.S. Department of Labor. And it was interesting to me, but the truth is that I wanted and needed a stable job. So I took the job, and it developed from there. And ironically, it developed into a position of management. Eventually, I was a manager for over 30 years, principally involved in protecting the most vulnerable and exploited and aggrieved workers. And it struck me that that is so apropos, because Holocaust survivors that my parents were just about the most vulnerable and exploited and aggrieved people you can imagine. So in my job, most of our cases involved protection of most vulnerable workers who were recent immigrants, often unable to speak the language. So there were connections at every turn. My parents came here not speaking a word of English. They went to night school to learn English and study for their citizenship exam. One of my earliest memories was being in kindergarten and sitting at the kitchen table in Brooklyn and studying the same, they called it civics lessons, that my mother was studying for her citizenship exam. Being the little wise guy 5-year-old that I was, I would ask my mother, Mommy, who was the first president of the United States? And she'd proudly answer in her Yiddish accent, George Washington. You know, I have distinct memories of that.
George.
So they both worked in the garment industry 6 days a week, typically. And
They worked hard.
they worked very hard, and they were the proudest day of their lives was when they became naturalized U.S. citizens.
My parents too, in fact. And I found that with my dad in particular, one of his proudest moments was when my brother and I graduated high school, because that was his reward for surviving, you know, the fruits of his, you know, incredible experience and survival story.
Yeah.
Have graduated high school. He was living it through us, basically.
Yeah. I would say my parents' greatest reward came before high school graduation. That was the day of my Bar Mitzvah. They had a huge reception in Gluckstern's Catering Hall on the Lower East Side on Delancey Street. And I'll never forget, I was a little bit of a rebel. I snuck out of my Bar Mitzvah because it was Mickey Mantle Day at Yankee Stadium in 1965, September 18th, 1965. And I snuck down to look at the TV sets in the storefronts on Delancey Street. And I wasn't gone for very long, but enough that it was noticed. So, you know, I was a little bit of a rebel.
How do you think your upbringing influenced the way you handled some of these cases in the labor department? Were you more empathetic, would you say? How did it influence you, basically?
It influenced me greatly. It constantly struck me that the workers, some of whom were, not to be provocative, but virtually enslaved, some were locked in basements in restaurants, and some in construction yards, and
For real?
not to mention the fact that many were not paid. The most common violation was failure to pay overtime. These people typically worked 70, 80
And how
hours a
did you
week.
find out about these cases? Were they brought to your attention? Did somebody file a complaint? Was there somebody squealing this information who worked for the company? How did that happen?
About half the cases were based on complaints
Directly by
the workers.
Yeah,
And it took a lot for them because many were undocumented.
right.
And the labor law is interesting because the labor law says that everyone who works must be paid regardless of their immigration status. So we had memorandum of understanding with the immigration authorities not to share information. So this preceded everything that's going on today. So for them to come forward to complain to a federal agency,
It's a big deal.
it's a big deal. It took guts, the kind of guts.
It did. And you recovered, from what I understand, over $100 million for these laborers. Is
Yeah.
that right?
Yeah, over the course of my career, just being a manager, I oversaw a collection of back wages. And then we had to deal with retaliation. There were laws against that, and kickbacks, and not to mention the most extreme cases of human trafficking where people were actually enslaved, as I said.
You spoke about human trafficking at colleges and schools and
Yes.
organizations. I would love to hear that presentation one day. Now, you said you spoke at the Turo College. Was that in Bayshore at the time?
It was in Central Islip.
In Central Islip?
Yeah. And I did a presentation on human trafficking right here at the center, where the audience included law enforcement. And I was part of a human trafficking task force involving federal, state, and local law enforcement.
So would you consider some of your clientele trafficked, per se?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. There's a legal definition of trafficking. In a nutshell, it says that anyone who is subject to force, fraud, or coercion is covered by the human trafficking law.
Mm-hmm.
Force is obvious. They're held against their will. Fraud, their passport or other papers are taken or forged. And coercion. Mm-hmm. You will work for us. You will be slaves in our home in order to pay off a debt from back home.
Right.
You know, I wasn't involved in that many human trafficking cases, but the ones I was involved in were memorable. It was a big famous case. A Newsday headline blared, "They kept slaves on Long Island," is known as the Long Island slave case, in 2007 and 2008, and went to trial, a federal trial. And the owner, foreign owner, who lived in Muttontown, he and his wife kept 2 Indonesian women slaves. They were chained to the wall. They were abused. They were tortured.
Terrible.
They were forced to eat garbage and whatever. One escaped, ran out to Jericho, found a way to Jericho Turnpike, ran into a Dunkin' Donuts. The police were called, and that was the genesis of that slave case. The defense argued that, well, labor law shouldn't be brought into this. It's a criminal matter. Labor law is a civil matter. The judge said, I'll allow it. It's all part of the abuse that took place. So we found that their work week consisted of 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, except they got some break for sleep time of 3 or 4 hours a night.
And I suspect that there's still some of these cases that are still happening. There's some scenarios where people are still treated as slaves here. They're trafficked. Their families are back home, and they're forced to work
to pay off a debt,
to pay off
or to pay their steerage into this country.
Right.
So there's so many layers to so-called illegal aliens, and I use the term freely because it's a legal term, but there's so much of a backstory to it. People are forced often, either willfully by their own will or otherwise because of what their families are going through. Mm-hmm. And my parents were immigrants,
right?
Which is another layer to me relating to them. They worked in garment sweatshops. I have no problem calling that for long hours and years. So
you can personally identify with their stories, and
yes,
their situations.
And I never talked about my parents' experience on the job, but it was very much on my mind. And I was the director of the Long Island office of the Labor Department, the Wage and Hour Division. We had 50 district offices. And for most of that time, I was the only Jewish manager, the only Jewish director in the country. And it became obvious to me that I was Jewish. There were incidents. I won't say I was discriminated against blatantly, but a national management meeting was scheduled in Kansas City during Passover week. I told Washington, I can't go. It's Passover week. Well, why not? Because it's Passover week. Well, there'll be repercussions. You'll miss out on the training and the resources divvied out, and et cetera, et cetera. However, it occurred to me I was one of 50 that were Jewish in the country. Jews comprise 2% of the U.S. population. I was at 2%, one of 50. So, growing up in New York, and I used to tell my kids this, you won't feel anti-Semitism. We're growing up in Brooklyn, you won't feel it. But as you get older, you'll feel it. My son moved to the West Coast before he passed away. I lived there for 10 years, and he had incidents where he was subjected to anti-Semitism. So we feel anti-Semitism being a child of Holocaust survivors in a different way. Mm-hmm. I can say more extreme, more relevant, just different. We grew up feeling different, and that was one of the recurring themes of the second generation group, how we grew up feeling different, being different, and in many ways. If there was a knock on the front door, my mother would say in Yiddish, Sha, Gayavek, don't answer it. And it was typically, it would be the full of brush salesman,
Mm-hmm. No, I understand. My parents were similar in that my father had like 3 or 4 bolts on the door, made sure that they were all, his family was secure and safe at night. As a final thought, because we're winding down, as a final thought, what message do you have for second generation, third generation, even fourth generation descendants of Holocaust survivors in terms of their responsibilities today and in the future?
I'd have to say that it could be a burden, but it's also a responsibility, as we said in the second generation group, to inform the next generations of the possibility of history repeating itself, because it has throughout history, especially throughout Jewish history. We see elements of that today in America. My parents would be alarmed. They loved America.
Mine too. They would be mortified if they saw what's happening in the news.
Yeah. So educate yourself, be vigilant, speak out. In my job, I spoke out when I saw policies being implemented that were wrong. And that comes from my parents also, to be outstanding, outspoken and upstanding, to use the center's language. And never forget who you are. It's important. We can love all humanity, and we do, but you should always remember where you come from and who you are.
Well said. Irv, you're full of wisdom and insight, and I'm grateful that you took the time to tell us your story, your personal story, your family's history. and talking to next generations about what they can do and what they should do, you know? Because we all have a legacy, a history that we don't want to die. And we should all be proud of our own cultures. Everybody on this planet should be proud of who they are, what their heritage is. But originally, we all came from the same place anyway. We're all one big humanity. But we are kind of like a bouquet of humanity, and it's a beautiful thing. And it smells nice, and it looks beautiful. If we all respect and appreciate each other the way we should.
Thank you, Bernie. I appreciate that. And I was very moved by your parents' story, your father's story, and some of the things you said resonate, especially don't be afraid of change. You even repeated it a few minutes ago. Thank you.
Thank you, Irv Miljoner, for joining me here on Raised by Survivors. I'm Bernie Fershpan, host here at hmTV at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center of Nassau County. Until next time.